Welcome to Blue Collar Mystics, the under-the-hood approach to the depths of human consciousness. So many mysteries, so little time, so many big words. That's why we aim to take the mystical and make it practical, usable in your everyday life. And you know, we want to hear from you. We want to hear your story. What happened when you started asking yourself the real questions? Like, who am I? What is this? Is it a hologram? Is this some kind of weird cosmic joke? Hey, these are the questions that we are trying to get to the bottom of as we explore the final rabbit hole together here as Blue Collar Mystics. Right, what's up, everybody? Honey's in the chat. Looks like it will be a good one. Woo, yeah, woo. Yeah, it's going to be an awesome one. I'm really excited. Thanks, everybody, for being here. A lot of cool stuff is going on, and I'm really excited to dive into this episode, but I do have to do a couple of shout-outs. I do have somebody present here, too, who I am really excited about. All the folks out there, you guys know about Competence. They're amazing. They distribute creators' content and back it up. Darrell just so happens to be the CMO of Competence, and I just plug you guys all the time. You do such a great job. So we're streaming on Rockfin right now, YouTube, as well as Facebook and our Facebook group, and we'll also be on several other platforms. So all the weird alt platforms, you know, we're out there. Even Gab TV, we're reaching out. You got to go to where the people are. So we're going to every place that we possibly can. We are launching our Blueprint to Happiness program tomorrow. We are really excited about that. Admiral Hitz has been out there with the Sonic Portal psychedelic spaceship at summer camp. He'll be at Sonic Bloom coming up soon. So go check that out if you're at those festivals. Grab the Blueprint to Happiness PDF that's in the show notes, and go ahead and just check out our website, bluecollarmystics.org. Check out all the info there. I want to first introduce Darrell Becker. Darrell's a friend of mine. You were on the last podcast that I have. Darrell is a holistic health practitioner. He's kind of a jack of all trades. He's a writer. He's a marketer. He's into mental emotional kung fu. He's got a course on that coming out right now, which is really cool. Welcome to the show, Darrell.
Thanks so much. It's great to be on with you, Owen.
Dude, this is a really a cool episode. I'm really happy to have you on alongside with Brett, who has done so much work that I've consumed. Dude, you were really instrumental in my sort of awakening, whatever we want to call that, right? Like whatever word to put there, you know, awakening, right? It's all about, you know, because of you, I found my destiny, you know, like, but no, really so much work since you've been putting out School Sucks episodes since what, 2009? Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So since 2009, and so many cool, we were even Darrell and I just talking about some of the different, our favorite sort of episodes and kind of what got us, hooked in to that. But you've done so much, such a body of work over that time, and right now you have picked 50 of the most essential and are sort of re-releasing those in some sort of a form or fashion. I listened to the first one just this afternoon. It was a great little introduction. I put that link also in the description, everybody, so go check that out. And yeah, I'd love to hear just a little bit more about that. I do think that it's something that a lot of people could use and a lot of people will benefit from, because there's so much that you covered in that range of that show. It's definitely a wealth of information and a lot to even cover, right?
Absolutely. I'm worried we're going to have to skip over the part where I ask you about the tarot cards in your introduction that I just watched.
Yeah. Okay.
I want to know all about it. Do you know that I did this recently for the first time, and I found it to be a very enlightening and challenging experience to do like a reading that lasted. I don't know how long they typically last. Mine was 5 hours.
Oh my God.
Virtual. Yeah. Is that too long? Is that too much time?
I don't know.
It seems like a long one, but I don't know.
I mean, it depends. What were the results of it? See, that's what counts. You know.
the result. What kind of results do you look for?
I'm looking for accuracy, some vision, some practical applications. You know, if I'm spending 5 hours on something, I'd love to know if I'm going to spend 5 hours listening to your show, Brett. I know that I can have I can start to list out the practical applications of it.
You need
You know, give
results,
me a little
right?
time. I'm kind of like that, but maybe there was an aesthetic result. There's the aesthetics of the experience was enough for you.
Yeah, I thought the whole process was very, very beautiful. I didn't expect it to reveal anything to me. I was just doing it because somebody who I really care about said, you know, I've done this. I'd like you to try it. So I did, and I was really just kind of in it for the intellectual and emotional exercise. And I probably forgot too much to have like a really meaningful conversation. I do have notes, but I feel like we're moving away from Owen's purpose if I start pulling out my tarot notes from months ago. I saw the cards and I said, "Oh, there they are, tarot cards." So they're very beautiful, and it was an interesting experience. So
I'm glad you had a positive experience. You know, like I came at spirituality as a skeptic, actually. You know, like I got
totally,
really
yeah.
into Ayn Rand and objectivism. I mean, those were some of the things that you were talking about on your show at that time. And I remember just learning about Ayn Rand probably from your podcast, and then reading like Atlas Shrugged. And God, I mean, that is one hell of a long romance novel, isn't it?
It's like 5 of my tarot sessions. Big book.
Yeah, it's a thick one. But looking at things through that lens, what was weird and kind of brought me back to mysticism or spirituality or the occult or whatever was I grew up in the church, and so we had some experiences that I could never really explain logically or objectively. So that was always sort of kind of in the back of my mind. But as far as like tarot and divination, there's a lot of interesting practicality to some of that stuff. I even have here just a pendulum, just a simple, pendulum like this that you can kind of ask a question to it, and then it swings a certain way. There's like when I ask it a question, if the answer is yes, it's supposed to go forward and back like that. It's like, show me yes.
This takes practice. I've only got 24 years practice with this kind of tool,
man.
So
it
does take practice.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, there's even one that my friend Abby, we've cracked the code from this old book, this Russian book called The Dream Searchers, and they do this divination technique with just a regular deck of cards. And so that's been kind of interesting to see too, which I think tarot was the original, and then cards were made because tarot was, taboo or something like that. But it's interesting, and yeah, there's a lot of actual practical application to some of this stuff. It's interesting.
I just thought it was like a really interesting new kind of stimulus for introspection. And the people who I did it with, they were 2 very old people on the other side. And they, there was the moon, right? There's this one card, and there's these moon off in the distance, and there's these towers, and then there are a couple animals, maybe a crab and maybe like a fox or something like in the foreground. And they were like, inhabit each of these things, or what's in the towers. And it was just like this kind of digging into my psyche in a way that I had never done before. So if there's any like meaning to it, or even practicality, I guess that is practicality as far as I'm concerned, to think about yourself in new ways and to examine your thoughts from new and different directions. So, and by the way, I've been working with our friend Nathan Frazier on a new podcast called Mindset Mastery, and Nathan tends to the woo a lot of the new thought stuff that started to appear in the early 20th century. And I, of course, have always been rooted more in objectivism. I'm not a big O objectivist, but that has been my philosophical grounding. So we try to negotiate on various mindset topics on those grounds. So I said to him, why don't we make all of the images in our YouTube videos tarot cards? And he said, no, because then people will be disappointed when everything isn't about tarot. So I said, fine, but I like it.
Becky Denny says, how about an Ayn Rand Oracle deck?
There you go.
I think that's a great mix. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Yeah. I think we all have to negotiate this sort of mental aspect. I think everything does come back to like the Kabbalion, like mentalism. And so, that's what I think happens to us in school too, is we don't learn, these basic fundamental truths. I think we have so much potential from a young age, and a lot of it is sort of molded and conform, and through conformity, pushed out of us, right? The creativity, the inspiration, the intuition, the curiosity, the passion, all those sort of esoteric things, right? Like, it's easy to measure, things in material reality objectively. But as far as like, where does inspiration come from? Where does motivation come from? Psychologically speaking, the inward is kind of the place that most people look last, it seems like.
Yeah. And school, watch this transition. School is really, I think, at like a formative stage for all of us in our lives, and it goes on for a long time. It's kind of about denying us an inner life, or that look inward at ourselves, where so much of it is about like extrinsic motivation, external rewards, so-called socialization, or performing for authority figures, or performing for a peer group. And as it was intended to do in a lot of ways, defining an identity for you with labels and assessments. So, any opportunity to discover new ways to look at ourselves and take that journey inward, I think is really, really important. I mean, I understand that people can get lost in some pretty weird stuff, but I'm always, a searcher going inward. And I think one of the big takeaways that I've gotten from, whether it's tarot or work with Nathan and some of this more esoteric woo stuff is Carl Jung had a quote that was something like, if you don't make the subconscious conscious, it will continue to run your life in often some very detrimental ways. So becoming more aware of the unconscious and what's in there, and what is that deeper current of the psyche, I think is an important thing that I am still in the process of mastering. It's a lifelong process.
I think so too. Yeah. I mean, it's something you got to just continue down that road but I mean, it's kind of impossible not to, once you open Pandora's box, But yeah, man, I'm interested to hear, a little bit about your putting this together, and what kind of stood out as you're kind of going back through, a dozen or more years of information and synthesis and learning, and to take all that I think some of the most valuable things that have been done for me is people taking huge amounts of information and then squashing it down to a small amount, so to kind of shortcut me. And that's something you've done really well, and I think you've done a good job producing it too. I love that you put like sound beds and actually go the extra mile in there too. But what really stood out as you're looking back over all of this? Was it some more of this discovery type of things, more of the things self-development, or what are we looking at here?
Yeah, I would say that was the biggest payoff for me in my own life, is doing that work. And that was a big part of, or really related to, like, putting this message out there and the people that it attracted into my life. Darrell and I got a lot of history. Darrell, we first met in 2013 virtually. And we've been working together. Throughout Darrell was in, some of the last shows that I released before I ended the podcast, or ended making new episodes of the podcast last year. But so many great people have come into my life as the result of, them receiving the signal that I sent out. So it was a really, really gratifying process, and I got a lot of growth and connection from doing it. I think as far as like the content is concerned, we tried to cover 5 areas, and those are the areas that will show up in this Essential School Sucks collection that I have started to release. I'm almost done with the first like domain of this. So as the title suggests, we do talk about problems with school. And those problems are historical, philosophical, political. They've become cultural as school is becoming more and more. I mean, I think this has always been true to some extent, but it's becoming more of a battleground in a kind of culture war, where, you know, people want to claim the minds of children more explicitly. It used to be something that was done behind the scenes or written in books that just kind of circulated in academia 100 years ago. But now it almost seems like it's out in the open, like there is a war on for your children's minds. And we, as the people who run the schools, are winning it right out in the open. And we're basically, you know, forcing you into this ritual humiliation about it. There's nothing you can do about it. So, yeah, the problem with school is a well that I always return to as new problems developed, even though my goal was to make the show as solutions oriented as possible. So the other four big categories are, you know, leaving school and finding educational alternatives. That is a big bulk of our work right there. Critical thinking and self-directed learning. And with that, I would also put like a subcategory of information literacy, which is a really fun thing to do shows about, like analyzing media, pointing out logical fallacies, looking at weakness in certain types of so-called debate. And, you know, the last category, and probably the most important, is the personal development. So we talk about all of the problems with school and then all of the educational things that school ignores, avoids, actually sends people away from in the wrong direction. And that helps us build, as a solution, a comprehensive picture of what a genuine, self-directed, intrinsically motivated, holistic education could look like. I don't want to say should, right? Because certainly people could get by in life without, you know, consuming every one of these topics or being knowledgeable on every one of these topics. But we wanted to do a broad sweep of everything that we thought this real education should be. So right now, I am going through 10 shows on the problems with school. Some of it is historical. The show I put out today was actually from 2018 as a response to the Discourse, we'll call it, after the Parkland shooting and the March for Our Lives. Parkland was the school in Florida where I think almost 20 teens were killed in 20, I think it was end of 2017, beginning of 2018. The political conversation around that, how children are kind of fetishized or made into a kind of prop in political debate that they don't really understand, and they're even denied a true understanding of it so they can be more useful as props. And I think we're going to see that a lot with the conversation that's going to take place throughout the month of June about what just happened in Texas. So I'm asking people for a lot right now, but as far as like immersion in problems, but I really listen back to these shows so far, and I credit being in the right place at the right time and having the right influences and the right information. But we warn people, you know, for the next show I'm going to put out is 10 years old, and it talks about outcome-based education and behaviorism. It will be called Who Controls Our Children? And yeah, we recorded it in 2012. And I almost just want to put like little pings, like little sound effects, like this is a thing that, you know, you should really pay attention to. And it's a weird, I'm not sure how I feel about it, because I know there is a kind of like emotional payoff in I Told You So, but that's only if the people that you're telling so are receptive to that. And maybe it brings about, you know, change thinking or better behavior. That's something that's getting harder and harder in the world to do. But I do like the idea that because there's so many voices involved in this, if we were ahead of all of these things that people are focused on now, we're building a kind of credibility to, you know, 40 shows that are coming that mostly focus on solutions. So we're right at the beginning of this. I just started it like mid-May. but I'm really excited how it's going so far. And I'm looking forward to meeting new people who come into the audience through the projection of this message.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I'm really excited about it too. That sounds amazing. Like, I know you guys covered so much, and it's cool because you can go back and see your own progress, right? Like, you can see, like, wow, like, look how like, I mean, I don't have to look back far to, be a little bit like sick to my stomach, right? But like, but at the same time, it's a positive thing too, to see that growth, because otherwise it wouldn't have happened. But going back through there, that's so much content. That's so much. I know it'll help to put that together in a shorter sort of format and try to sort of hit the skeleton of some things that you guys discovered. Because we were all discovering things together through that podcast. When, Darrell and I were talking about the history of American education. And so the first thing that I saw by you that really struck me was I Could Just Murder You, that little short YouTube video.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, dude, that was great. I loved that. It's just so succinct and right. Like, of course, as we grow and develop, we start to think about things. And I love the fact that you're like, I'm not going to tell you how you should do education, but here's one way we could, right, do education. I think we've all sort of, I hope so. I think we all continue to open up and like explore new terrain, new territory, new ideas, even such like the tarot or some other interesting new practice, some idea, and open up to it and embrace it. And I love to see just those pillars that stay 100% on. Like as far as making predictions into the future, I try not to do that, because it fucking like I don't want to be right. I'm usually not, to be fair, but I don't want to be right about that stuff. But as far as like understanding socially, what's going on and throughout and institutionally too, and being able to spot it and see what's happening, super valuable for people. I mean, we could kind of jump into solutions a little bit if you're interested in that. I know that's something that I'm always kind of looking at, because it's a complicated. There's a lot to unpack there, but it's something that I like to focus on. I really do believe the esoteric, what you focus on expands, where attention goes, energy flows. And so, as opposed to like I used to do very, very much, sort of rolling around and being like, whoa, no, we're doomed, as opposed to doing that, I've tried to shift my focus, which is good, because emotionally it wasn't a great way for me to live. So, what can be done? What can we do? What are some of the solutions? Even if it is just acknowledge and accept some of the things as they are, but sort of withdraw emotionally from it, right? Like, if I don't have kids, but if I had one in school, let's say, I might teach them how to be a good student, but then come home and really open up and share with them about the world. I don't know. I mean, if there's the unschooling, homeschooling, there's a lot of different ideas and solutions in there. But I would love to know. I would love to know how many ways are there to navigate some of the solutions. Probably quite a few. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the big question, right? This is like what is the crab thinking in the moon tarot card question, right?
Yeah.
Solutions to what? So the school system works pretty well for its telos. It does what it's supposed to do. I think that we're still as bad as things in school are currently. So the problems that we have is there are lots of parents that are worried. There's kind of a hidden curriculum that is pushing a kind of racial division or even like a race war, otherizing. There is a lot of things that feel like an intrusion into what are traditionally family responsibilities, like talking to kids about sex. The schools, too frequently, we're reminded that they're not safe places. And it's unfortunate that sometimes the reminders have to be so shocking and so tragic, but not all lacks of safety in school are, the horrors that we saw last week in Texas. There's bullying that happens constantly in school. The environment itself is a kind of bully, going back to depriving kids of an inner life and creativity and the assertion of themselves as an individual. That's all unspoken, right? That's all just taken for granted and never really explored. Sometimes bullying is very explicit. It comes from peers. It comes from teachers. So the schools are a very unsafe place. So those are three big problems, right? We have the content, the structure, the toxic culture of, and this is school at all levels, right? From elementary school to higher indoctrination. So, here we are, and parents are going, what are we going to do? How are we going to fix this? So we can't even get to an agreement on solutions yet, where it's like, this has got to go. This isn't good. This isn't a good place for people to be. I was really kind of saddened today going through this show that I put out that was, like I said, from 2018. It was with Thaddeus Russell, and we're doing this deep dive, big picture on the discourse around school shootings, but also what is absent, all of the really, really important things that are absent, things like mental health, things like gun-free zones, things like at least in the case of Parkland, it wasn't true in this last shooting, but forcing people to interact with each other in a closed environment are always places where you see terribly negative social interactions that often end in violence, even if it is, less severe violence than what happened last week. So against this entire backdrop, we still have an alarmingly small amount of people who are going, this doesn't work, right? They're saying, or not realizing what the purpose of school actually is, and saying, how do we fix it? And I think they're really putting a lot of stress on themselves, and they're directing a lot of, mostly emotional, but also some intellectual energy into thinking that they're tinkering with something that is way beyond their sphere of control, and will continue to do what it has always done. And that was like I was saying, that was the really disheartening thing about listening back to that show. The same conversation among the most vocal people, or the people who get to stand at the podium, or the people who get to be on television, they're having the same framing and the same conversation in this case that they were having 4 years ago, right? I'm saying the same things still, but, it's basically just like, the NRA gives money to politicians so crazy people can shoot kids in schools. That's it. So again, all of this, like, working towards solutions, I would like to get more people on board with the idea of the solution being, withdraw, like escape.
Yeah.
It, as we say at the beginning of the intro in all of these shows, the great Danny McCarthy opens the intro, and he says, there is no reforming the schools. The options are survival or escape. Now, survival was easier when we started the show, right? Like, if you knew what was going on there, if you knew how to navigate that, if you knew how to play it like a game, you could survive. But I think that is getting to be a harder and harder thing for young people to do with their souls and their bodies intact. It has really gotten much worse in the last decade. So, solution of getting more people to agree that they need to withdraw, they need to leave that system behind. And then this whole other conversation about solutions opens up that I think is really exciting. And, I'd be willing to evaluate any option, but not be prescriptive about anything. Everyone talks about, like, charter schools. Like, a charter school is not a very precise word. A charter school could be run by the most passionate people committed to, self-directed education, or it could be like a fly-by-night thing that pops up in a strip mall. So it really starts as, like, the conversation about solutions starts with the individual, right? And you go person by person. So, if we've criticized the school in polite company, we've gotten a response that's something like, okay, well, how would you do mass compulsory education for, I don't know, 60 million people you don't know? It's kind of a ridiculous question.
It is, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean,
But
yeah, Gerald, please.
Well, at the same time, you know that what you're talking about are the problems of schooling are features, not bugs. But for those who are parents, they have two things in mind that they've merged in their mind. I'm telling you this as a parent and someone who is around a bunch of other parents. And those two things are, I need a place to put my kid, the babysitting aspect of it. I just didn't schedule the money and the time and the mental and emotional fortitude to stay around my child. Have a child, but just really, if I could just have it maybe like 2, maybe 1.5 hours of their consciousness every day, except for the weekends, and that would be plenty. And that's about all I budgeted for with this child. I need them away most of the time, partially to make money, because again, I didn't schedule a job or a way of making money that can include them, where they can watch and participate and learn that. And I don't even have the skills to be around them emotionally and mentally. So please, God, give me a place to babysit them. And I'm assuming this is the only way. It's going to take 15,000 hours to show them everything to be an adult, right? The opportunity of a parent. That's to guide them, to constructively guide them from helpless child to adult and empowered, like that. And they're saying, well, I don't really know how to guide them there. So I'm going to assume hopefully they'll do that. This is what school is for. That's going to guide them to that, right?
Yeah.
And this is, I think, that type of philosophical apathy that you spoke of in so many shows, this self-reflective apathy that's caused by the obedience and conformity lessons, makes it so that these parents would rather not acknowledge that, that really didn't serve you. Like a lot of what you got in those 15,000 hours didn't serve to give you anything close to resembling being adult prepared to thrive in this world. And now how's that going to do for your children? And they'd be like, no, I just don't want to think about it. I just need a place to stick my child, because again, this is what everyone else does. We just had children, but didn't schedule anything around what it takes to be around them.
Yeah, no, and that's something that I'm the best I can be very sympathetic to. I mean, life happens, and people. There are a lot of assumptions and a lot of things overlooked about the schools, and there are a lot of people now who have 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 15-year-olds, and these things were far less visible, far less palpable when they, made a plan to have children and those children were born. So what you're describing, Darrell, is certainly most people. I'd like to think it's, not most of the people who are listening to, these shows that I'm putting out right now. But I get that a lot of those people might be trying to make, a tougher choice of this awareness and like needing to do something. But, wondering, okay, is there a way to survive? Is there a way, on the other hand, that this could get better, that this could be reformed? And I totally understand the emotional buy-in of holding out for like, this has to be temporary. This will get better. This will, like, all of these things that keep appearing in the news, these divisive issues around, elementary school, middle school, high school. Higher education is less of a concern here for, what we're talking about, like the practical, like how do we have a day-to-day life as parents with a place for our children? So, yeah, I really feel for anybody who came to an awareness of what is happening in the schools once they were already dependent on them. That's a really shitty place to be. And those people have my sympathy. So one of the ways that my thinking adjusted through the history of the show was I became more open to options, where you might remember, like in the beginning, I was very much a purist towards like homeschooling and unschooling. And like, this is, this purely self-directed kind of education. I mean, obviously it's the ideal and it can exist in numerous environments. But, I think in episode 1 in 2009, I said, we're not after political solutions. We're not trying to reform the schools. But there are people who I consider today allies. in how they could possibly buy time and create options for people. So think about somebody like Corey DeAngelis, who is, you know, the 5-star general. How many stars do generals get? 4 or 5? As many stars as a general can have. General Corey DeAngelis of this fight, like really, really on the front lines himself of trying to create more options for people. So then people don't have to, you know, tell themselves a story so they have a place to put their kids that is this terrible place. You know, so then they have to lie to themselves and lie to their kids about where they're going and why. If more school choice exists, and if there is a political solution of like people being able to move the tax money that goes to pay for the schools into an institution of their choice, that's more options. And I can't say to somebody who's in this situation and is really devastated or stressed by it, that's not pure enough for me. You know what I mean? So I'm totally supportive of what Corey is doing. And if that money, if school choice becomes a reality for more and more people, and they can take that money that they're paying, and obviously not everybody's going to be able to do this. And that's really unfortunate. That's really unfortunate. But if more people can move their money towards institutions of their choosing, even though that will have a good long-term effect on, you know, the market signals, it also creates options for them to say, okay, well, I didn't plan my life like somebody in the 1800s, they might say, who has a farm. So, I was born into the machinery of the 20th century, and everything was already moving along, and this is what you did. And that's how I learned to be in life. And, now I've gotten to this age where I'm rethinking it. And boy, it's stressful. So a long answer to your statement, but I think that because we're running out of time, and because there is a very active campaign politically to reduce options for people, those who, even if they're doing, like, if they're going down paths that we might not pursue, like the political path, I definitely see people like that as allies. And I actually included my conversation with Corey very early on, just to maybe, like, before I told people the horror stories a la John Taylor Gatto, I would give them like some kind of breathing room, or like, here's a door. If you're not ready, to to visit this hell that I'm about to unveil to you, like, that's understandable. And here's a space, here's a potential escape, right? That might be in your near future and might already be available to you. So I count that. What a long answer to a question about I'm not even a tenth of the way done, I feel like, but I count that as part of the solution now. Where in the beginning I would have, shied away from that as playing politics, but or legitimizing the system. But people, if we want to delegitimize the system, people have to have options and avenues for escaping it first.
So
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, I see that the surviving escape. I agree with you. I think, as far as like really truly an overhaul or fixing it or anything like that, that's not going to happen. But in the meantime, there are some band-aids and things like that. Now, what I guess I want to get down to more than school is education itself, right? Like, how can we make education good education, based on solid principles, fundamental ideas, how can we make that more accessible to kids as well as even adults, because I basically, when I started listening to you, and it's funny, you're wearing a Peace Revolution shirt, that was the thing that really kind of got me, like I realized, oh my God, I'm stupid. Like I was like, I'm fucking dumb. Like it hurt. Like it was insulting. It hurt my ego, but I knew it was true. And I had to acknowledge it and say, oh my God, like the way that I viewed the world for the past 30 years is not accurate. It's incorrect. I've had the wrong map this whole time. I've got to throw it out and build a new one. And fortunately I did. I could have done it probably a lot more healthily than I did. But I was fortunate to have the tools in the peace revolution stuff, and so many other great creators, right, making stuff at this time, and bringing the truth, new ideas, right? Like I didn't even you're not taught libertarianism in college, like you're not taught like alternative philosophies or different styles of anarchy or any of that kind of stuff in political science class, right?
Mhm.
It's just very direct and very, very much like, in this tiny box. But like being able to, go out there and explore and have that self-directed education, even at the age of 30. For some people, maybe that's too late. For me, luckily it wasn't. But, how do we, especially in this continued, censored sort of landscape, how do we promote education and those ideals, even though we're kind of like giving up on the school thing, right? Like the surviving, escaping thing. Maybe you have to survive. Maybe you get to, and I know that's harder, but maybe you can escape. But regardless, how can we, be sure to promote education and solid education based on classical ideals, principles that we should probably be learning in school.
Okay, so what does it mean to be educated?
That's a good question.
Open question to the group, right? So
cool. I like this one.
Yeah.
It is to have functional methods that hopefully become ingrained skills and habits that achieve a desired and predicted result. That's educated. Like, in other words, whatever it is, however you do it, even if you're just fully using intuition or even tarot cards or dowsing with a pendulum, no matter whatever the method is, as long as it yields predictable and desirable results, that would be educated, like Mark Passio would define it, like educare, to lead out.
Mm-hmm.
Literally to lead yourself in the direction that you desire to be, achieving.
Sure.
I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that's great. I would even go a step further and say to have it's implied in what you said, but to have the problem solving skills and to have the perseverance when you don't get those predictable results, right? Because you won't always.
Persistence.
So, yeah, I think there's a kind of self-reliance in truly being educated, like being a competent thinker, being aware of the processes of your own mind and the processes of other minds that might be trying to influence you or manipulate you, and having making that explicit, I think, is really important. Like the more things about the mental processes that you can understand, I think part of what you said was like replication, methods, systems. So knowing what's going on inside your own head, and the result of that is, developing methods that get results, developing problem solving skills to improve results is a really important foundation of what it means to be educated. So that's another kind of internal journey to add to what we talked about earlier with school robs people of the opportunity to go inside, right? To know themselves like on an emotional level, but to know yourself on an intellectual level and to develop a kind of confidence through that, a confidence that exists in attitude, but a confidence that also exists in practicality. Like, I can do things. I'm self-reliant. I think that's really important. So,
yeah.
So as far as the education question is concerned, aren't we doing it? Isn't it happening all around us? I mean, isn't it like everywhere in our world? Aren't people cashing in on this in private ways all over the internet all the time? We're watching this revolution. And the shows we do, I mean, School Sucks was free for people who, couldn't afford to or didn't choose to support it. And I wanted it to be that way for the people who needed it the most, which was these young people who were, trapped in these schools. And it would be there as long as the internet is around for people to discover. So, I mean, that kind of takes me back to the essential School Sucks. People could discover it and really not know what to do. It didn't, by the end, seem like an intelligible, clear curriculum. So what I'm trying to do now is make it into a system and perhaps even a bit of a method where it's like, you understand this problem, you understand that there are all of these people and all of this energy pursuing alternatives. And here are the properties of those alternatives. It means developing as a person. It means thinking critically and being a self-directed learner. And it means having good intellectual defense for the increasingly hostile world that is around you. So when I'm done with this, by the end of the summer, hopefully, I hope that when people discover it in the future, they will say, oh, okay, this makes sense.
Yeah, I love that you're curating it like that, and, from the personal development, I haven't really considered the question, what is an education? But more like, what is learning? We would say in the sort of personal development arena that it's behavior change. And education's got to be, some sort of storehouse, some sort of tools to be able to understand that you can create changes, right? And manipulate reality or consequences or material existence or whatever, right? Like the learning part is part of the education, but the education itself would come with some tools. I would think that someone who has an education has access to mental leverage through certain things that they've picked up, right? And they can do the self-directed learning as a result of being educated. If you're not educated, you may or may not, right? Like you might intuitively pick up on it, like Darrell was saying, which is cool, but you may or may not. Like I may not have been. I needed somebody to smack me over the head and be like, dude, you're really dumb. You need to, open up your awareness to a much broader world literally existing around. I couldn't even see it. I had this like very narrow view of what reality was at that time. And so, being able to learn, I think is part of an education. Otherwise, I think we're learning stuff. We're having this learning happen to us. We're maybe not even conscious of learning, but education would be the ability to learn, on your own, to have those tools and abilities.
Yeah, which is really, that is basically the antithesis of school, right? It's interesting too about how it's kind of compartmentalized, where we see how large the do-it-yourself industry is. People can learn to do all these things, but when it comes to the really crucial matters, like I hate to put politics in that category, but philosophical and cultural things, people are very, very easily led. So I used to have political conversations with an older man who was a dentist, and I would let him put a drill in my mouth, but the stuff that would come out of his was like insane. But I knew he was competent with that drill. So it's weird how people can compartmentalize that competence or forms of self-reliance, but in some ways they still need to be I don't think I have a good answer to that. I think the more I thought about it, I could, come up with something. But yeah, I'm just now filled with curiosity about that. It's interesting, isn't it? Like how it's not like we have a bunch of people out there just, walking around bumping into each other because they were schooled. There are a lot of like really competent, really talented people who, in some ways, and I think the answer is because the school environment engenders this over 15,000 hours, where they're told to be led, they will be led. Where they most need to be self-reliant and independent in their thinking, they won't. It's interesting.
But they'll also be compartmentalized, Brett. They'll be compartmentalized. In other words, they'll be groomed for competence within certain specialities, within like a like a subset. That's the whole, what was that process of the sorting process of school that Gatto went into, where they'd be sorted into what they're really potentially could be good at, and then encouraged to go further in there. But then they'll have these blinders on, so they might be very competent. Again, that guy who ended up all the way through dentistry school and could drill in your mouth, but can he really analyze fallacies that are going at him from the New York Times or CBS? No.
We realize it's not an intellectual process, or it's not in like the intellectual world. It's in the emotional world, right? So I'm reminded of a book, Darrell, that you told me about probably 8 years ago by Jeff Schmidt called Disciplined Minds, where you have extremely often intelligent and competent people who are hopelessly obedient, right? And will exist in these kinds of sandboxes, or maybe he calls them playpens in the book, that their authority structure puts them into, and they will never think beyond that, or try to integrate beyond that, and or be curious about what lies beyond that. So and most of those people show up in medicine, as we have certainly learned over the last couple of years, but also, you know, the hard sciences as well. And I'm sure it's worse in the soft sciences.
I think a lot of times the foundation is missing too, right? I can remember being introduced to stuff too, you know, in our development in school. Like we read 1984 in 7th grade. I read it again at 30, and like my mind just exploded, you know. But when I was in 7th grade, it just was a science fiction novel to me. I couldn't see the metaphor. I was too young for it. They're like, here, read this. You don't have a foundation for it. Like the people who are super far developed and also compartmentalized, they often they didn't question the basics. They didn't have a proper foundation, I think, a lot of times. So they don't even, it's not even on their chart. It's not on their radar like I was, right? Like they call it cosmography charts, or your mental map, or your model, or you know, because the map's not the territory, right? Like, but you don't notice the territory if you don't have it on your map. So if it doesn't exist there, you just are completely, you know, oblivious to it.
Yeah. You know, 1984 is a really good example of that kind of disintegration, where you could read it at a certain point in your life and be like, what is this about? And an authority figure could be like, it's kind of about the Russians.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Geez, that's what a relief, because it was really starting to remind me of my world a lot.
Again, that's a feature, not a bug. If you give a baby a steak all the way up until the point where they obviously can't digest it, and they're a little child, and they still don't really quite have the teeth for it, they eventually learn to hate steak. And I think that was the purpose for them to put these philosophical time bombs of novels, or what do they call it? You know, novels of ideas like 1984 and Brave New World, in front of children way before they're ready, completely absent the context. And obviously, and then there's the other part too, where the cognitive dissonance would kick in a little bit, to say that would try to stop them from seeing the connections between their reality in this forced association situation of school, and then the reality that Winston Smith goes through in Brave New World, again, which is huge amounts of forced association. And that's a setup right there. Like I had to read that book, Lord of the Flies. Brutal story. And I was a child, and I felt like, I mean, I already was being picked on. I already had the bully situation going on. Like, wow, you just brought it home. Like, this is exactly how far things could go. You know, like that.
Yeah.
I think it was the different lesson was just to say, this is what forced association can do. That was a bigger lesson in that one. But I think a lot of what seems to be thought of as bugs in these schools of the world right now are actual features designed to put out the people that we see around us, designed to like basically install the problems mentally and emotionally that all three of us are still working on undoing the damage of.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's such a good line. And I think it really you know, speaks to what I'm trying to do with this curation is, hey, these are not bugs. Like the things that your kids are enduring right now, I'll show you the people who were decision makers in the system talking about them in 1917, you know? So, I think that is a really, really important takeaway from these conversations, like features, not bugs, because the energy and the agitation that's being, you know, channeled from parents into the school right now is like something has gone wrong. The wrong, right? The right for school and wrong for parents, children, and communities is just becoming more in your face at this point. But these things are not going to change. Or if they change, they're just going to take on some new form that is equally, if not more, detrimental. It's kind of like the bigger picture of school is, they were these behaviorist laboratories, like even though they were always about indoctrination right from the very beginning in Prussia, 200 years ago. Wow. It's a lot of school. 200 years ago, through all of their so-called evolutions and reforms, by 1960s, they'd only become these experimentation centers for the science of behaviorism, how people could be turned into stimulus response like animals. And from there, it was just one descendant form after another, all the way through Common Core. I don't know what the new initiative is, or if there even is one, but they're all just continuations or rebrandings of the previous bad thing for your children.
Well, that's a lot of bad news for the viewers of the show right now. What about the good news about, both of you guys, you must have heard how many people have entered home education, homeschooling, unschooling over the last couple of years, right? Do you, Brett, do you either of you guys know the metrics or the numbers on that?
I think it was from 2019 to 2021, a 5-fold increase.
That's really good news.
Yeah. It's huge. Absolutely. So, then a whole new conversation opens up about what to do in that situation. And you have people who are involved and intentional and curious as parents. Once they've, as what it means to be educated, they've taken matters into their own hands, and now they're, problem solvers in these, unique and probably really challenging and, often stressful situations. Everybody got a taste of this 2 years ago, of at least a simulation of it, even though school was still running the show. But yeah, the developments beyond the whole school choice thing, which is just giving people mostly lateral options, maybe upward out of a really bad and dangerous place. But, from one institution, one building to another, now we have people who are, homeschooling, but homeschooling is also a very broad term. We never liked the term home. We didn't like home and we didn't like school. So even though it is the SEO keyword that you have to rank for in my business, it implies people sitting at a kitchen table with books, and I really liked real world education. So hopefully all of these people who still probably need help and still probably want some guidance as parents in the last couple years with all of this homeschooling explosion are also starting to understand that this can happen anywhere by so many different means. It was interesting. I had a conversation with my dad today, and I was telling him about what I was doing. And, my dad is a boomer, and he was the chairman of the school board, and thoughtful, but set in his ways in a lot of ways. And, he's just the schools just don't they're just not, it's just, they're not effective. Right. And he always wants to look towards a place called Asia for answers. And, we're having this conversation. He's like, well, why don't we just, ask the question, who does it best? Japan did it best at a period. So then there's it, and there's best to unpack there. But, got results, got kids who got good marks and had the requisite skills for integrating themselves into the work world. But there's also a lot of unhappiness and a lot of suppression. And, I said to him, who, if the question is who is doing it best, maybe the answer is still Japan, because who is doing it best right now, I think, is video games. And I was against this because I saw them as a kind of babysitter in a lot of cases, but it was actually Peter Gray from Psychology Today. His blog is called Free to Learn. And he turned me around on this in just one conversation. And I should have known, because nothing about institutional schooling is intrinsically motivated or purpose driven for the so-called learners. But if you put them into this situation where they have to solve puzzles and problems to go to the next level. They are, even if it's just confined to this video game world, they're at least simulating meaning. They're at least simulating purpose. They're at least conquering difficulties. And that's building a kind of problem-solving self-esteem and self-assuredness. School, whether it's in Japan or the United States, never gives anybody any of that. You are not explained the purpose of anything, hardly. I mean, maybe there's some exceptions. There's, thoughtful teachers here and there who say, well, you really need to know this because of X, Y, and Z. But for the most part, kids are deprived of attaching purpose to what they're doing. And that's kind of a soul-crushing thing, to work day in and day out for no understanding of where it's going. I mean, you have some vague idea like, yeah, you have to do the 4th grade stuff so you can get to 5th grade, and eventually there's a 12th, and eventually maybe there's a college and a job after that. There's nothing like really alive in a person about anything that they're doing through all their years of their lives. So, in this conversation, I was saying, yeah, the answer is not Japan just because they get good results on paper. The best answer right now are, the avenues that give kids a chance to feel independent, purposeful, like problem solvers, and they have a motivation. Even if we think it's silly, they have something real inside them that's motivating them to learn what they need to learn to go to the next place. So that's what schooling lacks entirely. And anybody who can be creating that anywhere, outside of these buildings, video games or otherwise, I think that is moving things in a very encouraging direction, away from what we close our eyes and picture as homeschooling to real world, self-directed, purpose-driven education.
Yeah, because I think the symptoms are really just self-worth, right? Like that's the thing that school smashes you to death, and so with the self-directed thing and the ability to have like a purpose and a reason and a direction, well, I mean, that's going to give you a different feedback loop. It's like that indoctrinated sort of feedback loop from school. We all suffer from confirmation bias, right? Like if it's not on our map, we can't see it, or we either have to make a new place for it, on our map, we classify it as something we already know, or we can't see it, right? Like there's 3 options of new data, new stimulus in our reality. So you have to figure it out from there. But we're constantly sort of going through this feedback loop of confirmation bias. So if from a very young age, it's, the 7-lesson school teacher, right? Like, and basically just John Taylor Gatto's work. If you're not familiar with it and you're listening to this podcast, highly recommend look it up. Just type in the 7-lesson school teacher, John Taylor Gatto, and also anything by him. What an amazing man. But yeah, basically creating a feedback loop that's not a proper foundation, right? Like if you don't have a good working map from the outset, then it's going to constantly be this repeating problem, and the puzzle is going to be coming back again once and again over and over to self-worth, right? Like it's such a simple and obvious thing, but we all struggle with it, right? Like if I don't have a reason, like the sort of going into this behaviorism and scientism sort of avenue, right? Like nothing matters. I went and saw that new movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once.
I've heard about this. Yeah,
it was good. I did appreciate it, and you can say this in a lot of different ways, but they said 3 times in the movie that nothing matters, right? Like that, and so like you can look at that in a couple different ways. Like friends of mine would say, right? Like, well, it doesn't mean it that way, but like I think the toxic drip of the black pill is just nothing matters. Like there's no reason for, and so that's the sort of lull and the hypnotic state, the trance that's trying to be, pushed in. Why would I have self-worth? There's no reason for me to feel like I'm solving a problem. I'm not helping anybody else. What's the point, right? Like at that point, everything becomes meaningless and nebulous and sort of nihilistic.
Yeah.
I think that's why one of the most popular shows you did, Brett, was the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem series. Yeah. I think that was pretty up there on the popularity, right?
Yeah.
Because people crave that meaning and purpose in their life. that's what self-esteem is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, living purposefully. If anybody's unfamiliar, we could run through it really quickly because I think it's so important, just as even like knowing what these 6 pillars are and what this means. I mean, self-esteem is such a destroyed concept by the schools, maybe because it's nebulous, but maybe because it's also implicitly attached to doing good at school, which is kind of the opposite of what, the creator of the 6 pillars, Nathaniel Branden, actually lays out. And, this is definitely the part of this will appear in the Essential School Sucks, because as Darrell said, it was, I think, maybe the most important work we ever did. It was me and Wes Bertrand. And it was Wes who actually introduced me to the book. But Branden talks about, self-esteem not as something that you have or you don't have, but like red hair, but something that you build through a series of practices, right? So the first pillar of self-esteem is living consciously, which is what, opens the door to being able to actively and deliberately practice the other 5 pillars. The second one is self-acceptance, which is where the self-esteem movement kind of got hung up. They weren't following Branden like in the 60s or the 70s. There was a lot of like, the whole, if people are old enough to remember Stuart Smalley, the guy who looked in the mirror and said affirmations about how he was good enough and smart enough and people like him. It's okay to do that, right? That's actually okay. But the second pillar of self-esteem was self-acceptance. So you open the door to looking at yourself and the world of around you through living consciously, and then you have a foundation of respecting and honoring yourself, right? And that becomes the kind of mode of operating in life that can take you higher to taking responsibility at the third pillar. So, I'm aware of what's happening and I'm happy in my own skin. So I don't have to blame other people. I don't have to hide. I can take responsibility for the things in the sphere of my sphere of control. If we can take responsibility, we can go to the fourth pillar, which is living assertive. Now, obviously, all of these are interchangeable too. It's not like, a hierarchy. They all work together. But the fourth pillar is self-assertiveness. So not sitting on your needs, not sacrificing your needs, putting yourself out into the world in a lot of ways, which takes you to that purpose, the fifth pillar, living purposefully. And once we try to live purposefully and, we're asserting ourselves and taking responsibility, life can get pretty complicated and kind of, challenging sometimes. So that last pillar is about really being true to who you are, true to your word, and living with integrity. So that's the sixth pillar. Branden has this great line in one of his books. People do stuff and they say it's okay because only I will know, but that is the only person who actually matters, right? And that is integrity, and it's a very, very challenging thing to master. I think all of this is it's an active pursuit throughout all of our lives to practice those pillars. But school is the antithesis basically of all six, in one form or another, right? The deprivation of having an inner life. Like my inner life when I was in school was something I would get in trouble for. Why are you drawing right now or daydreaming when you're supposed to be paying attention to bullshit? There's very, very little self-acceptance because you're, you are approved of by others, right? Like who cares if you approve of yourself? We've got these report cards. You've got these peer groups. There's this, not that competition is bad, but there's certainly the presence of a kind of competition that is not based on individually set criteria, right? Like somebody else sets the climb this tree, fish. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that. This is how
I know this. We all know this cartoon.
Yeah, everybody gets the same assignment: a monkey, a fish, and a horse, and the assignment is climb this tree. What's not fair about that? So that deprives people of the ability to practice self-acceptance. What do you have to take responsibility for? The two biggest, what I called hidden lessons of school are obedience and conformity, right? So you don't have to take responsibility for, asserting yourself as an individual. There goes the fourth pillar. And you're kind of dependent on a peer group to make meaning out of you, or the larger school environment. Obey and conform. So you don't have to take responsibility, and please don't assert yourself. So you're not really set up for those higher pillars of, developing a purposeful life. People certainly get schooled and do it. And then being able to integrate a lot of it through, living with integrity. So I think that was one of the most valuable lessons I learned in the 12 years of doing School Sucks. And again, it takes a lot of practice. But yeah, school works against almost all of that in all its forms, pretty much constantly, and at all levels.
But who does it best? Like your dad said.
Japan.
Yeah. Okay. And then the it part, that makes me think of like, those are producing some extremely obedient and conformist people who at this point probably innovate less than anywhere where there's large amounts of freedom and choice involved.
Yeah.
Which is why you still have lots of that pumping out innovation coming on from the United States, even if you might have economic powerhouses in Asia rising upwards, right?
Yeah. And by the end of the conversation that I had with him about this, he's like, holy shit, you're right. So that was good. And those were ideas that he had probably held since he was the chairman of the school board when I was in first grade. That's almost 40 years ago. And we turned that around in one conversation, just with a couple of good examples. I talked about South Korea too, how the celebrities in South Korea are tutors instead of like musicians. I mean, they have popular musicians too. Movie stars, but tutors are up there in that kind of celebrity because there's so much damn pressure on these kids to perform in school that the tutor who can get kids ahead, get kids into the better school, get kids the best grades are like rock stars.
Oh, that makes sense. My daughter just came back from teaching English there.
Oh,
in South Korea. Yeah. Cyprus was there getting to see. Basically, this was like an English immersion school that she was in. And at first it was going to be like, oh, that's cute. They're going to be like, what, like maybe 6 or 7 years old or something, right? Like something natural like that. But no, Brett, barely 4 years old and sometimes 5. And, they have like a different way of saying age over there where you were born and you're 1 year old immediately at birth. So they might be called 5 years old, but they're technically, by our standards and understanding, are 4 years old, just learning basic Korean, and now they're learning some English, and also just learning like the bathroom, like that at the same time,
Yeah, boy, that's a lot of pressure. Like you're just born and they're like, you're already one. Let's go.
And then all of them trying to learn all this with masks on at the same time. That's it must be hard to be in Asia is all I could say.
Yeah. Well, now my dad knows that too.
Oh, right, because he's watching.
I was satisfied with that. Like, and that is the question. Like, what does it mean to be educated? I use the word holistic. Are people in Japan happy? Are they, joyfully procreating? How's their mental health? Like all of that has to be part of the mixture when you're evaluating like who does education so-called effectively. So he didn't know anything about South Korea, but I said that's a tremendous amount of pressure on young people. And believe me too, like my first job tutoring was in the greater Boston area. So this was 2006. And I was working with kids who had friends commit suicide, in those like last like junior and senior years preparing for college. And you can't put all of that on the artificial pressure of school. But there's lots of kids who didn't, who were plenty stressed and plenty depressed and, plenty alienated from themselves, who were, just kind of living with it. So that exists here too.
So at this point, I just got one more question, Brett. One of the least favored series that you made was on ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Event Score.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I think it's more important because I've used it many times in relationships where I find out what score my friends and romantic partners would be getting like that. Would you mind like just describing what that is or the relevance?
Yeah, it was a metric developed by Kaiser Permanente. And what they actually found was, so the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experience Study, I think is what it stands for, would be traumatic events that happen before a certain age in life. And the more of these traumatic events you endured, the higher your score would be. And then they were able to at least very, very strongly correlate emotional and health outcomes as adults based on the severity of the ACEs. So understanding this, I thought at the time it was another really, really valuable tool for, it's very sort of quantitative, but when you look at the correlations that they found, it's also pretty enlightening to, we live in a world where a lot of people will say, well, I don't need to go back and look at this or that. That's in the past. There's nothing I can do about it. And again, it's kind of that, I empathize, like that Jungian, the unconscious, runs your life if it stays unconscious, unless you make it conscious. So when we did that, it was 2015. And I was, learning about that. And also along with that, which was a big part of the series, was internal family systems therapy, which is about how our whole selves get fractured by traumatic events. And we develop sub-personalities that kind of compete in many ways of, running the show of our whole psyche. And I thought the book we used was called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And I thought the tie-in between a basic understanding of internal family systems and the ACEs was like really, really important information at that juncture. It was a kind of graduation from the look inward that we did with the 6 pillars. Again, this was something that I did with Wes. So I think that is what we are trying to speak to, is like how to take self-knowledge to the next level. And it was probably the most unique pursuit, considering our whole project and our mission. But I felt like it was something worth including. And yeah, you're right. Like a lot of people just didn't go, it wasn't what they wanted, and I get that too. I mean, when I started the show, it was called School Sucks, and it was about complaining about all these things that were way outside of my control. It didn't become any kind of look inward or an encouragement for other people to look inward as part of, what it means to be whole, or what it means to be, holistically educated, I guess, about what's around you and what's in you for some time into doing the show. So I'm glad. I was just down in Austin, Texas, where there is a lot of attention paid to these kinds of things in a very intellectually diverse kind of community. And I have friends there who are currently involved in some interesting types of outreach. So I hope that understanding or that exploration continues to gain popularity, especially as we kind of reach this crisis point where the world needs it more than ever, especially considering what people have endured in the last 2 years, what they will endure most likely in the next 2 years. And this was something that I was talking about today in this school shooting show that I put out. Like, people need to get serious about mental health. It is a real third rail in the gun violence issue. And I think it's something it's so important to that, and it's so disturbing how it is avoided in talking about gun violence, or especially like youth on youth in the school violence with guns or without. It's I think for a lot of people, there's just too, and I mean like people of influence, people in power, there's too much jeopardy involved in really looking at that, because it's such a root cause. And if it becomes popular to look at root causes and not just how the NRA is bad, or how Donald Trump is bad. If we graduate from conversations about people and events to conversations about actual ideas and really difficult ideas, that's a lot of sophisticated minds running around out there. And that, as far as the people in power are concerned, that's not anybody's goal. So, yeah.
I love how a lot of this stuff just turns into a buzzword too, because I couldn't agree with you more. Mental health, right? But like people are like, "Oh, mental health. Let's eat pizza and like
It's cliche." Yeah,
sit
it's
around.
kind of cliche, and it's almost like a lot of the people who are very good manipulators with language and with this kind of dialectic are of the left. Like the right isn't really very good at it. They had their day, like when we needed to go to war in Iraq. Like, yeah, they came up with a few clever lines, but a lot of the language manipulation and discourse manipulation happens on the left. That's where a lot of the intelligent but disciplined minds are, who know how to manipulate and manage the public perception. So there's almost like preemptive strikes against things, like narratives are put out, there's pushback, and then the next time that narrative needs to be used, there's like these preemptive dismissals of things like that. I mean, you would get language like climate change denier. So it's just like, well, if we're having a conversation about this, could I, put this into the exploration of, what's going on with climate change? And like, no, if you're not saying what we're saying, you're a climate change denier.
Put this shirt on. That's right.
There's so many examples of that. But yeah, I noticed that actually in the town hall event that CNN did, where, I mean, this is what CNN does 4 years ago when CNN was good compared to CNN now. We're going to have a public policy discussion around school shootings. And we're going to take the politicians and the Parkland victims, or the Parkland survivors, and we're going to put them head to head in front of a huge televised audience shortly after this incredibly tragic and traumatic event to, have a rational conversation about politics. And it's a very, very hard thing to watch, but very early on in the conversation, somebody demands that the only issue that be discussed is guns, that this is only about guns. Don't try to say it's about anything else. So, and any talk about mental health in that conversation, was also like very stigmatized. Like, some people are crazy, and then there's the rest of us who are just normal, trying to solve problems, on a stage in front of millions of people on CNN. Like normal people.
The Overton window, huh?
Like the responsible people do. So, yeah, I think it's, even as somebody, I would say that I'm more interested in my own mental health than a lot of people that I've met, for sure, probably a majority of people that I've met. And there's things that I still don't want to look at, or things that are very hard to look at, or hard to look at and work on in a sustained way. So if nobody has had any of this exposure, it doesn't mean that they're defective, or they're not as smart or smarter, or, it's just an incredibly difficult thing to do. And there are millions upon millions of people having that difficulty right now, a difficulty that has been made a lot worse. I mean, we saw, like how normalized drinking was in the last couple of years. Like, oh yeah, I drink, wine during the day because COVID. And that just became like a completely culturally acceptable thing. So Yeah. I am very, very sympathetic to the challenge of that. And, you know, all you can do, or all I can do from my little corner of the world, is encourage, people who are seeking or wanting something more, including myself, to take it seriously and go about it in, most importantly, a sustained way.
Yeah, I think that one of the powers, what are the powers that be, right? Like back to the idea of asking internal questions, right? Like, what's going on in here? Like, well, no, don't worry about that. But like keeping such a like lid on mental health, keeping a lid on ideas like internal family systems, or people are, a lot of like our audience is probably more familiar with Carlos Castaneda, right? Like the idea of recapitulation through his work, right? And people have different ideas about him as a figure or whatever. But as far as the principles go, the idea is to integrate these parts of yourself, the same as the Jungian, right? Shadow, these parts of ourselves that we either said, no, that's not okay. I can't allow that. I don't like that about myself. Somebody else, maybe, who knows what trauma happens. But then when they have this debate, all they're doing is just literally creating more trauma that it's going to take more time, to get in there. And a lot of people, this is why there's a coaching industry, is because if you go the traditional route, are you even going to get the tools to really be able to help people? Maybe not, but being able to take some of these ideas and work on our own psyche at a deeper level it's not even on, it's off limits to a regular person to be able to do that. No, you got to go talk to a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and they've got to prescribe you a pill or, whatever the thing is, as opposed to having the tools, the education to know like, oh, okay, well, there's a reason why I have a limiting belief here. It's because of a trauma, or there's a reason why I have predisposition to I'm afraid of heights, or who knows, it could be anything, right? Like there's got to be able to be a way to work backwards, to undo that, to start to work within ourselves and heal ourselves and help other people heal. But I think so much of that is so guarded. It's like we weren't even allowed in psychology in college, for instance, to learn about Freud's ideas. One of the most impactful minds of the century, right? And we're not allowed to, because well, don't worry about that. Just don't worry about it, right? Like it's just it's not important.
There's that Overton window, that expression of where if you control what is allowable questions, the Overton window of allowable opinion and questions, then you're going to navigate everything. Like that's the same metaphor as you gave me years ago, Brett, where there's a parade going on and the government just jumps ahead and grabs the baton and leads it in the direction it wants to go. And, that they like, it's all about guns,
Yeah.
Pay no attention to like what is actual health, not to mention mental health, and,
Yeah. Another analogy that comes to mind is Plato's cave, which was the analogy that I used in the show today. And I said in the monologue, it just kind of came to me as I was watching the waveform go by. I was like, boy, the world would be a much better and more peaceful place if everybody just understood the allegory of the cave, which is, the quickest way to sum it up is like reality might not be what you think it is. And if you discover more, don't expect to be rewarded. That was, Plato's message as a philosopher. But it is very much about in school is such a good tie-in with the allegory of the cave, where symbols and illusions are given meaning as a kind of counterfeit knowledge, a kind of counterfeit reality, which is what people in this cave, it's like, in Plato's story, and this is in the Republic, people are chained to a stone and they look at a wall and there's fire behind them and people are putting shadows in front of the fire. And that's their sense of reality. So, 2000 years later, there might be better ways to do this metaphor, like the Matrix, for example, but which was probably based on the allegory of the cave in some form. But one person escapes the cave and goes outside, and it's incredibly painful to be there in the sun and to see the complexity of the world, and then to return to the cave and be confused and disoriented by the darkness, but try to encourage people to come see what's better, what's richer, what's fuller about this existence. And, you know, basically being told, we think the cave is fine, and if you keep bothering us, we're going to kill you. That's how committed to the cave we are. So, you know, we're seeing that show up in, you know, how people spill out of school into the world of ideas and discourse right now. There's a tremendous amount of apprehension and defensiveness. More than ever, it gets worse all the time. And it's not, you know, even school's fault, I think, that people have become so afraid of opposing ideas. I think it's a feature, or maybe a bug in this case, of technology, the technology that we use every day, and how it silos and echo chambers people into where, like, people who think differently are basically incomprehensible at this point. And then along with that, people have their identities and their like sense of goodness as a person so tied up in their, you know, political social worldview, that having it questioned is almost like a kind of personal attack that they're totally not prepared for, because they exist in an environment where they don't even see how anybody could think different. And when somebody approaches with like a thoughtful rebuttal or even a goddamn question about what they think, it is a threat at this point for more and more people. So, you know, that is school has responsibility in that, because it goes back to that, you know, what does it mean to be educated question, making independent, confident, self-reliant thinkers. Like, it is certainly a lack of confidence to not be able to wrestle with competing ideas, and a lack of self-reliance as a thinker. And people, you know, return to their authorities to get reinforcements when they're temporarily disturbed by an idea that conflicts with, you know, their worldview. So, I mean, school is a part of that, but that's been exacerbated so much in the last 10 years. And that is something that we are dealing with and are going to continue to deal with, and will probably get worse before it gets better. I hope there has been enough positivity in this show, because I feel like I've ended, you know, like at least a handful of my little diatribes with something that's like grim. But I'm feeling positive, you know, like Back to the Essential School Sucks. I'm so excited to turn the corner and finish The Problem with School shows and get on to the next thing. And I think there's like a whole new energy is going to come into this once that happens. So,
Like, I think the thing that inspired me to say, Brett, is just there's been a huge change in all of us in how we communicate with people to plant those seeds to allow for possibility. Like, I mean, I heard your description of how now what your brother is considering home education for the children, right?
he was at one point. I'm not totally sure where that stands as the next school year approaches. So we'll see.
But either way, just there's the planting of the seeds part. I've been trying to be tactical about it, trying to figure out, okay, what's the in for a lot of people? And from my perspective, it's been, how do I raise courage up? Because usually if there's a clenching and a fear, there's a safety security issue around that somewhere. And sometimes speaking to that or calming it down, or just finding where there is courage in someone's life and communicating to that direction. Like, especially what people are really proficient at, then I can, if they're really good at whatever it is, they usually have some courage to be nurtured around there. Same thing with curiosity. Though the fear story that might be like in their head going really loud, there's a way to find how to build up curiosity in other areas where they don't have a fear story.
Mhm.
And I wondered if you guys did that for ways of planting seeds for people. Because obviously, here's a podcast link I think you might like, is like a planting seed thing. But when I'm having like any type of discussion, like I had a dinner party recently, you know, that's a whole different ball game. How do you guys do it?
So back to the, if you don't mind me jumping in real quick, the allegory of the cave thing, right? I heard, this is not my observation, somebody else's. They had said, this is what happens when you tell the truth to people and you don't make it funny. So to answer your question, Darrell, I try to make it funny. I try to like talk about the absurdity, the incongruity. I think cognitive dissonance, it can only go so far before something snaps, right? And you're like, all right, well, shit, I've got to reevaluate things. It doesn't take me long to start reevaluating things. As soon as I'm not getting the result that I want, I sulk and, get pissy, and I go back to the drawing board, right? And I'm like, okay, what am I doing wrong? But most people don't do that. That's something that we have to train, right? Like, it's back to learning and education. It's like they just, we're not trained to do that. So, but I think using humor in any way possible is, first of all, regardless, just a great way to disarm and to, and to provide some positive energy for people. So that's kind of what, my angle has become. Now, when I first got into this stuff, I was the guy running back into the cave. Oh my God, you guys are not going to believe it. Like that guy. Yeah. Dad, let's buy a farm and fucking a bunch of gold and shit, and shotguns. And so, as we've, continued to develop and grow and still live in society, because I don't want to be like a shut in. I don't want to be like a hermit or anything. Like I like people, I like being around people. And so, when it comes to the idea of solutions and those types of things, that's one thing that's great about the internet. It's pretty undefeated, right? Like, you're going to find the meme. Somebody's going to make that one golden comment that's just a side-splittingly hilarious observation that points out the absurdity, and hopefully enough chinks in the armor later, boom, somebody sees something that really hits home. I don't care what it is too. Like I've talked to people who, have different beliefs and ideas, and I've mentioned them even offhand to people. Like, I was talking to some folks one night, and I mentioned something that I had heard on a specific documentary, which was a flat earth documentary, which wasn't the point of what I was trying to say. I, was just saying I was watching a documentary and they said this, and it just so happened to be a flat. And as soon as I said the two words flat and earth back to back, like, it was like you could see the things go haywire. Like, there's no whatever you have to say, it can't be right, because that's heresy. And then, this is a person who has probably had to fight through a struggle of questioning their reality before. So, I don't think it matters what the sort of catalyst is, because everybody kind of comes about this different. It's one thing that I'm actually really curious about, how people start asking these questions, right? Like, what caused you to start unpacking some of the things that you didn't understand, asking questions within yourself and you're about reality. Who am I? What is my purpose? What am I doing here? And these types of, very obvious questions. But
yeah, I think I'm having a little bit of trouble finding what it is, but I think there's a tie-in between what Darrell asked and what you just said, as far as like momentum is concerned. Like, how do we, if Darrell was asking, how do we outreach, or how do we go about doing that? That was a part of your question.
Yeah.
Okay. Trying to find people who are already in motion, I think, to some extent, even if they're just kind of scrambling around. We've seen this a lot in the last couple of years, where lots of people could no longer ignore how many things were wrong with the world, right? They realized that they were in these raging rapids, but they're doing this thing because they don't know how to swim, right? They're just kind of flailing around. But that's motion. That's somebody who's potentially looking for something. So, if somebody's laying on a couch and you like, hey, do like think fast with a ball, they're like, what the hell is wrong with you? But if somebody's jogging down the street and you toss them a ball and they go, hey, I caught the ball and I threw it back, like, that's a better thing to look for mentally. But I think you also need to what you were saying, Owen, like, when you realize things are going, when you're trying to outreach to somebody and you realize things have this momentum in a wrong direction, like finding a way to diffuse it, and maybe like change course a little bit, or that's kind of like which martial art is it? Jiu-jitsu, where you sort of use the person's momentum to your advantage.
That's
Yeah?
Aikido, but same.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So, I think if there is a tie-in between those two things, it's being agile and looking for agility, or at least somebody trying to practice some kind of agility. There are, I think it's probably most people you're really not going to be able to do much with at this point. I do agree with the power of laughter, but I really think it's like people have to be in motion to some extent to be able to really like make a connection and inspire curiosity.
Yeah, I think asking questions too is something that's really helpful. Like you can ask a question and then just brace yourself so you don't get triggered, with the response. But asking those questions, like I would sometimes throw something on Facebook like, do you believe you're immune to propaganda? Right? Like as a just a question, right? Like, and so like that forces
kind of
you.
Not specific. That's interesting because I'm like, I don't know, Owen. Asking people questions who don't agree with me hasn't been going well for the last couple of years. They're like, what are you up to? Why are you asking that? What are you really thinking? There's like kind of that's a really good example. That's really interesting. Yeah.
That's funny. But yeah,
a lot of this. Darrell is good at this in his Facebook posts. Like it's usually something, or a lot of the time something provocative, and then some kind of a question.
It's a hidden method for marketing. So I just self-select to try to have less of the clients that I don't want to really work with.
Yeah.
And that's the purpose of my Facebook page, if you're just curious.
Yeah.
And that's why I use my real name,
Right.
But,
So
I think that planting seeds is one thing, but then with every single person is an opportunity. I look at it that way. Like I never really know. They could end up becoming a good friend or a client, someone to get on your show, on both of your shows, for example, like that. I never really know. So I just try to have a flexible objectives going on, like where I'm taking in the scene of that. We have something in common being Homo sapiens, we have there's something similar here. We're both breathing air or something like that, unless there's some Carlos Castaneda inorganic being construct. But, I mean, in general, there's some continuity there. So, and then there's those bases, like what I got from Marshall Rosenberg, these core values that he called needs, these abstract qualities that forms a map of their reality. And I've got one for my reality. And we have some overlap. So some people might be very big on the whole justice and equality values. And I'm over here kind of big on the autonomy and choice values, like that. But there's some similarities where we both have kind of like safety, security, and we both kind of like harmony and aesthetics. And I can usually find several other values besides where we can find a meeting of the minds like that, to, again, just to figure out like if it's a meeting with in-laws or something like that. And the purpose is, one of the objectives is maintain a harmonious weekend with the in-laws, like that. One purpose like that. And then discover, literally, like it's a discovery process. Where I don't really know them, discover more with open-ended questions like what you gave, Owen. That was pretty brilliant, like that, and obviously looking for the Minesweeper thing. That's what I always called it, where I'm playing Minesweeper with certain people who are very religious, especially, the left is very religious, that type of thing, where they firmly believe things. Their reality tunnel is concrete. My reality tunnel is a bit more plastic and flexible based upon evidence. Has moved a lot over these years, like many notches, and they poured theirs out of concrete. So then that's okay. That's how they create security for themselves, by having a concrete reality tunnel. But somewhere in there are some objectives where I could find, like, there's a similarity, there's potential. I don't know. Like I'm digging myself in a hole here, you guys. Maybe you can save
I
me.
love the reality tunnel stuff, dude. Like, so Robert Anton Wilson is one of my favorite thinkers ever. I love him. Prometheus Rising talks about the reality tunnel. He talks about what the thinker thinks the prover proves. And one of the biggest things that he said, I'm a fan and an advocate of a pliable reality tunnel myself. He would say, I don't believe anything, but I have my suspicions. So like, instead of like being so determined, his other thing was to prime the language, like to adjust language so that you're not being definitive about things. So instead, his example is like, Beethoven's better than Mozart. Like, that's a definitive statement. And I'm saying that this one is better than that one for sure. And if you disagree with me, you're wrong. But if I say, to me, I enjoy Beethoven better than Mozart, right? Like, it's an opinion. And so now the level of consciousness, he would say, like, would raise overnight if people would stop speaking in that way, like what seems to me to be, or like maybe logic. I think he also talked a little bit about like just being open to other ideas. I'm a big fan of the pliability of the reality tunnel, because he would do experiments too and be like, become a vegetarian, for instance. And then he would feel, in his gut, like sadness when he would walk by the butcher shop. But then he would become a non-vegetarian and that would go away. So he's pointing out the programmability of the human psyche, right? Like, and through specifically like Timothy Leary's model, the 8-circuit model of consciousness. But, even just as a holistic, concept, like that reality tunnel and forming it, that view of the world, like that's the leverage too,
I took a big inhale. I was like, oh, imagine if we get into the Timothy Leary 8th circuit consciousness right now. Google it, everybody. It's a big subject. Yeah, I think I love Wilson too. I remember like Cosmic Trigger was like one of the first really expanding books that I read. I don't even remember how I would have found. I lived in Salem, Massachusetts, where every other thing is a New Age bookstore. So I found it in there, and I think I looked at the cover, and maybe I'd been like listening to Coast Radio, so I knew what the Illuminati was. The Final Secret of the Illuminati, and I was like, "Yeah, there it is. There's the book I'm looking for." I don't think I knew anything about him or had ever heard of him, but I opened it and I started seeing like all of these things that I remember the margin was filled with notes of things to look up, but then I would, see and hear or experience things that I did know in this book, or in this whole sea of unknown to me. That was a really, really memorable experience reading Robert Anton Wilson. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a big, map is not the territory, Korzybski, type of follower. And that, I think that 8-circuit model of consciousness was Timothy's like contribution. I believe it was a discovery though. I think it was something that is ancient, that's found in a lot of like old statues and different things like that. I haven't studied it super duper in depth as far as the origins of it. I just know the model, but I think it's something that's been actually around and with us for a long time. The idea of these foundations and how we develop, right, as human beings, going through these 4 developmental states of psychology, which are really the 4 basic ones that we learn about, but I think that's on the square, right? Like, that's what the Masons call on the square. Like, you didn't develop beyond this 4th circuit of consciousness, like this adolescence, right? Like that development. And then so beyond that, it would be these higher levels of consciousness, and which are really difficult to define and all that stuff too. But, I was fascinated with that as well. And in his work specifically, like, really spoke to me. The exercises too in Prometheus Rising, I thought were brilliant. It's like, imagine yourself finding a quarter on the ground. Now, when you find a quarter on the ground, however long it is, 2 weeks, 5 days, 6 months, ask yourself some questions. Did you put the quarter there? Did you see the quarter because you prompted yourself to see the quarter? Or, like all these different questions of like, what happened, right? Like, and the whole point of all that stuff is experiential. And I loved that, because it was also not from a place of like piety or better than or holier than you spirituality. It was like, yeah, these dudes are eating mescaline and like smoking dope and whatever. They're not going to look down their nose at you, because you want to have a martini or something, right? Like, they're talking about consciousness changing as experimenters in that, and trying to understand literally what consciousness is. And he was literally linking drugs to the different to the different circuits and stuff, like talking about how opiates and are correspond to that first circuit of that mothered nurture kind of aspect, and then going into alcohol in the second as this like ego developed masculinity place in the herd forms, and then up from there I think it's the speed as the third circuit where the intellectual development begins to happen.
Yeah, I remember it was like, okay, if we talk about this for one more minute, I'm definitely pulling it up, and then I don't know what's going to happen. But it was like the first circuit was forward back, right? Like maybe fight or flight, and then left to right and up and down. So that gave you like the first three circuits were the reality that would be the most people would ever inhabit, right? The sort of three-dimensional world, right? This way, or forward, back, left to right, up and down, and that kind of gives you your cube that you live in. Those three circuits. It's coming back to me now. This is also where I learned about the Terence McKenna and the world ending in 2012.
Right.
Well, and it was 2005, and I was like, geez.
Yeah. I think, all these guys, they've got 80% really cool stuff, 20% who knows, were they CIA people? I don't know. I feel like most of my heroes were probably part of the CIA, and like 80% of the stuff that they put out was great. And then 20% was like time wave zero, or like, one of the things that Robert Anton Wilson can't get off of is evolution, right? Like he won't come off that like throughout his writings. That's that one sort of thing that he doesn't really question or poke, which is fine. I think the rest of the model's fantastic, even regardless of how he bases it. But there's always like sort of that one thing. Like I love a lot of Terence McKenna's work too. I find it absolutely brilliant. But yeah, he was not right about everything, and he may have even like come out and admitted to being like affiliated with something or whatever. But I mean, regardless of who says it and who backs it or any of that, truth's truth. I mean, try to take the best that we can out of these models and then reassemble it into our own sort of working model, right? And then that's the reality tunnel. I'm glad that we touched on that. That's so fucking cool.
I mean, yeah, go anywhere, try anything. I think that was the MO of people like McKenna and Wilson and Timothy Leary. Like, have an experience. And the big takeaway for me as a young reader was like, get your mind, look at how look at all of the invitations to take your mind off autopilot, which it probably was, in a lot of ways, and probably still is sometimes. But, like, look at the adventure you could have. It was a really interesting first exposure. I was very like ungrounded at that time, and probably, not as critical a thinker, but I was ready for adventure, and they definitely provide adventure. It'd be interesting to like go back with new eyes and a new mind and dig into. I don't think I ever read Prometheus Rising, so is that my next book? It could be my next book. I could be back here talking about Prometheus Rising.
Let's do it, dude. I love that book. He displays so much humor in it. It's so down to earth and approachable compared to everything else that I ever really read. But that was the big idea is, what the thinker thinks, the prover proves. He builds all that and has all these different exercises in there. And to me, that one was super duper refreshing. And I mean, God, the guy was mega prolific. I mean, he wrote a ton of books. And Discordianism, I thought was really cool when I learned about it, that little religion that they made up in the 70s where you like eat a hot dog without a bun on Friday. I mean, they were way before Atkins on that. But they had all these. They were praising Eris, like the goddess of chaos, which, funny enough, I didn't even know that's a real thing, right? Like later on, I learned through myth, through like studying Joseph Campbell, and I read the book Iron John, and then they talk about the myth of the golden apple, and Eris comes back, and she's the one who gives the apple, right? The goddess of chaos. So that fucked me up. Like I was floored when I was like, oh my God, like that was actually based on, I mean, a real myth. Like, how do you say that? But, but an actual, thing that people has acknowledged. It's an ancient idea, and they were just bringing it back. But anyway, yeah, there's a ton of stuff in his work, especially that Prometheus Rising book. It's a lot of fun and funny, but it's very, very educational as far as like human development. It's a cool model.
Let's set a goal that I'll come back at some point in the future, and we'll talk about that book.
That sounds awesome. I'm definitely down for that. And Darrell, you can be the accountability buddy.
Yeah, I'm putting it down here because I haven't read the book so that'll be a first one for me.
Dude, that's awesome.
That's great. This is way better than discussing white fragility and CRT in schools.
We didn't do any of that. We didn't have to. We found a roundabout way. And for me, it was like, reading Robert Anton Wilson when I was younger, and developing a creative problem-solving approach. So, what else can we do before I have to go to bed here soon?
Well, yeah, me too. We should definitely wind it on down. I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much, Darrell, for being here and co-hosting with me. And Darrell and I, we meet weekly, so we've been really getting to know each other the past year plus, maybe two, pretty good bit, and it's been awesome. So yeah, anything that you want to just talk about or promote, or anything that you have that you like to inform people about, we can talk about that, and then we can call it a wrap for now until we meet again.
Yeah, absolutely. So the new podcast that I'm doing right now with Nathan Frazier is called Mindset and Mastery, and I have a feeling that the people who really enjoy this show would really enjoy those conversations. They're all pretty short, but you can see them all in a playlist by visiting the School Sucks podcast YouTube channel. You just search YouTube for Brett Veinotte, BRETT VEINOTTE. You'll find my channel. All the School Sucks stuff, as I implied a second ago, is there too. If people are interested in the subject of or the problem with school, there is a playlist there called The Underground History of American Education. It is a documentary length group of videos that I did based on John Taylor Gatto's book of the same name. And, whenever I talk about school history or analyzing the school problem, Gatto's shoulders are definitely the ones that I stand on for that work. The amount of stuff that Gatto did in a world without the technological advantages that we have today, making phone calls, writing letters to the education department at Harvard University, trying to find obscure documents in the 90s, these kinds of things. The work he did is absolutely amazing. It's so amazing that it almost overshadows, the master that he was as an educator, and the innovator that he was, and how courageous he was as an educator. The work that he did on speaking out against the school problem in some ways distracts from that. But I really recommend that people watch those videos and learn more about his work. And just find School Sucks podcast wherever you catch podcasts. And we are currently running through the Essential School Sucks. I just put out the 8th one today. So there's 8 shows and an introduction so far. Maybe by the time this is out as a podcast, I don't know how long that takes, we'll be done with this first part, the problem with school, and we'll be on to the, leaving school. I can't wait for this, leaving school and finding educational alternatives. And I would really recommend people, getting involved. So that could be commenting on YouTube videos. I love to read even the most insane YouTube comments. But we also have a School Sucks group. And if anybody is really ambitious, we have a private community called the Un-iversity that is actually like a learning community, and in many ways a kind of support group for a lot of people who might feel from time to time isolated by their immediate like social or professional or political surroundings. And, we meet several, this is actually something that takes up a lot of my time. We meet 3 times a week. We have, really thought-provoking, sometimes challenging, sometimes somewhat contentious conversations. A lot of it is in response to things that are happening in the world. but it's an open. If people wanted to join this, they would find a Discord community with like a club for just about every interest. So that is something that I'm very proud of as something that spun off from School Sucks. But yeah, it's the Essential School Sucks, the Un-iversity, and the YouTube channel where you can check out this new podcast I'm doing with Nathan Frazier called Mindset Mastery, which is kind of like a highlight reel of a lot of the personal development and mindset stuff that we talked about through the years on School Sucks, with a sprinkling of Nathan's woo, which I really, really like. And I've actually learned a lot doing that show with him so far. I think we've got maybe 13 or 14 episodes out.
Dude, that's awesome. I'm definitely checking that out. Yeah, I have links to the main website in the description there, guys. So make sure to hit that. And I'm going through the Un-iversity stuff actually right now, the coursework and in the background. Yeah, so I find it really helpful. And yeah, folks, like I said, links are in the show notes. First episode of all the essential stuff is a link directly to that, as well as the website. And I can't wait to hear what you've been working on with Nathan. I'm stoked to get into that myself. Darrell, please let us know what you're working on, where people can find you, and we'll get out of here.
I still got a little slowly growing channel, not medical advice, still up, some of it on YouTube, most of it on BitChute, and where I can say whatever I want about medicine, the things I can say that are completely inappropriate or not in any way useful to say right in front of my clients, because they want me to get the job done instead of to sit on a pulpit. So I get to use Not Medical Advice as my forum for that. I just wrapped up my first info product, an online course called Mental and Emotional Kung Fu. And that just gives people some potential skills to apply in their personal and professional life to basically calm the internal narrative, to rearrange thoughts in an effective way, to understand the 4 core emotions really well, and to give insight into the counterpart, the other person, and what motivates them to create a win-win situation. And I'll be making, mentalemotionalkungfu.com. That'll be something, a way to a portal to send it out there. ME Kung Fu, something shorter to type, and like that. And yeah, that's what I got going on. But I'm really excited for what you guys are going on. Also, certainly contentsafe.co, where we get to distribute work like Brett's work here and over there for your work, Owen, on as many platforms as possible, making it distribution much less of a hassle.
Pissing Christians off left and right on Gab TV,
Yep.
every day, man. It's funny. No, I definitely want to have you come back on, talk about communication, nonviolent communication, and some of the mental emotional kung fu stuff. So I'll be setting that up with you. And man, I really appreciate your time. Brett, thank you so much for coming, man. You're a big hero to me. So it's really cool to be able to have you on the podcast, and it's kind of a milestone for me. So thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure. I have a feeling like we could do a lot of work together in the future. So I had a great time tonight. Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun, and I definitely will come back.
That's awesome, dude. I'm so glad you had a good time. Thanks again. Thanks everybody out there. You guys are amazing. Much love and blessings to you all, and we'll see you guys next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.